Let's cross now to Maryland, where I'm joined by Joel Rubin, the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Joel, thank you so very much for being with me here this evening.
It's great to be with you, Batya.
How realistic is this timeline that the Wall Street Journal is reporting on from a practical point of view, and is it at all significant?
So purely on the practicalities of the timeline, this would make sense, 9 to 12 months. But the acts of getting agreements, that whole diplomatic program, that is where it's going to get very complicated. And so one could negotiate within 9 to 12 months, but right now it's not clear that all of these issues can be resolved in 9 to 12 months. I think that what we're watching, though, is a very important breakthrough in terms of creating an environment that accepts the idea of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and of the United States playing an active role in getting there with real issues on the table. So there's a new political environment, and that's a very positive sign.
Now, critics say the Israeli-Saudi normalization pact could die in Congress if the Palestinian issue is overlooked, specifically among Democrats. So how is Joe Biden really putting this forward to his party and his supporters?
Yeah, you're asking a really intriguing inside ball political question here in Washington that's been talked about now for several weeks as this information has been coming out about the advanced discussions. There are a couple issues. There's, of course, the Palestinian issue, and Democrats would be very suspicious of any agreement that does not truly advance the goals of a Palestinian state. But there are also issues related to nuclear technology, and apparently Saudi Arabia wants American civilian nuclear technology. That could be very problematic. Congress has a role. In particular, the Senate has a role to play in authorizing that. And so the idea here is that with President Biden in the White House, he could potentially lean on Democrats because Republicans are likely to support anything. I'm not going to take that for granted, though. And I do think that there are multiple issues with Saudi Arabia directly, bilaterally, between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia that could very much interfere with congressional support for concessions to Saudi Arabia on, in particular, the nuclear issue.
Now, there was a report just yesterday in Lebanese media that the U.S. Special Envoy to the region, Amos Hochstein, is set to visit the country soon and will bring the Saudi peace deal up with Hezbollah, who is largely intertwined in Lebanese politics. How are they expected to react? They don't even call Israel by name, and they're backed by Iran. Is this sort of a my enemy's enemy is my greatest friend? And what's the U.S. position here?
Well, the U.S. position right now is clearly exploring ways to wean, in particular, countries off of Iran, in the case of Hezbollah, wean Saudi Arabia off of China. There are a lot of different countries in the region with a lot of different interests. And we've seen in the last year or so a move towards China, in particular with the UAE, in terms of partnerships, the UAE as well engaging with Russia. And so I think this kind of diplomacy, putting it out there that this is the goal, this is the big one. Let's just step back for a moment and make this clear. And I think this is why we're covering it, why you're focused on this today. This is the big one. If the United States is able to foster peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, that changes the dynamics of the entire region. So for Hezbollah, they have to look at their patrons in Iran and think, what are they going to say? And Iran just made an agreement with Saudi Arabia. How does this play? And so it's a very creative act. It's going to kind of shake things up a little bit in the discussion. There's low cost to that as well for our diplomats like Amos to tell people this is where we think we're heading in the region. And I think that will hopefully start to create some strategic competition as well diplomatically that the U.S. can take advantage of.
And Joel, in the last 30 seconds that we have, how would this deal impact American voters? Would it give Biden a big enough foreign diplomacy win for a bump in the polls?
Well, President Biden, he certainly cares deeply about foreign policy, and America's role in the world matters. American voters don't always vote on that. But in this case, with this issue, if President Biden is seen as bringing peace to the region and not entangling American troops, and that's a very critical part in this, not entangling American troops into another war in the Middle East, he can tout that as a big success of his administration.
Joel Rubin, the former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, thank you so very much for joining me here this evening.
My pleasure.